Welcome to Revenge with Precious, where we share real stories of betrayal, resilience, and the courage to stand up for yourself. These are tales of people who refused to stay silent, who drew boundaries when love turned toxic, and who chose their peace over family obligation. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, these stories are for you. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that might change how you see your own life. Please, watch till the end. Let's get started. The boardroom smelled like victory, leather, and lies. 37 people watched as my career ended in real time, broadcast on a wall screen large enough to display quarterly earnings or public executions. Today it was the latter. The VP of Operations stood at the podium wearing a smile that belonged on a funeral director who just sold the premium casket package. Behind him, my 17 years of biotech compliance work reduced to a single PowerPoint slide labeled Strategic Realignment Initiative. My badge still hung around my neck. Security was already moving closer. I had exactly 90 seconds before they'd escort me out like I'd stolen office supplies instead of building the regulatory infrastructure that kept this company legally alive. So I did the only thing that mattered. I opened my laptop, navigated to the federal licensing portal, and clicked one button. A single confirmation dialog appeared, Remove Authorization Signatory? I clicked yes. Then I closed the laptop, stood up, and walked toward the door while the VP talked about efficiency gains and modern compliance frameworks. Nobody noticed the system timestamp that had just logged my exit from every active regulatory chain the company owned. They were too busy applauding. My name is Evelyn Hart, and for 17 years I was the kind of invisible that corporations depend on but never celebrate. Senior Licensing Officer at Vanguard Biopharma, a title that sounded boring at cocktail parties but meant I held every federal authorization the company needed to manufacture, export, and sell pharmaceuticals across 43 states and 12 countries. I wasn't the face of the company. I was its spine. The kind of employee who arrives before executives finish their morning commute and leaves after the cleaning crew has emptied the trash. My office sat in a corner of the compliance wing, 3 floors below the executive suites, surrounded by filing cabinets containing physical copies of every certification, permit, and renewal notice that kept our labs operational. People called me paranoid for keeping paper backups. I called it pattern recognition. I'd watched 3 restructurings in my time here, watched departments gutted and reassembled like Lego sets by consultants who billed $400 an hour to recommend firing people who actually understood how things worked. But I'd survived because compliance wasn't optional. You couldn't optimize your way out of FDA regulations or streamline past DEA requirements. My work existed in a world of hard deadlines and federal consequences, where missing a renewal date meant production lines went dark and executives faced congressional hearings. So they'd left me alone. Until they didn't. Derek Vaughan arrived on a Tuesday in September with the kind of entrance that makes HR send company-wide emails about inspirational leadership. New VP of Operations, recruited from a tech startup that had recently gone public, featured in 3 business magazines as a disruptor who believed traditional corporate structures were strangling innovation. His first all-hands meeting happened in the main auditorium, standing room only, and he wore jeans with a blazer like he was about to pitch venture capitalists instead of address employees who manufactured life-saving medications. His presentation had animations. Lots of them. Buzzwords flew like confetti: synergy, agility, lean transformation, paradigm shifts. He talked about eliminating friction points and empowering dynamic decision-making frameworks. Compliance, he said with a practiced pause, creates necessary guardrails but can also create unnecessary friction. The room stayed silent. I sat in the back row taking notes. When he opened the floor for questions, I raised my hand. He pointed at me with the enthusiasm of someone who thought engagement was winning. I asked how his lean transformation model accounted for the 18-month regulatory review cycles required by federal law. He blinked. Then smiled. That's exactly the kind of resistance to innovation I'm here to address. People laughed nervously. I didn't. The meeting started 3 weeks later, scheduled during lunch hours, invitation only, held in conference rooms with frosted glass that prevented anyone from seeing inside. I wasn't invited. But I noticed who was. Junior managers from operations, 2 people from finance, someone from IT whose job description included the word automation. I also noticed something else. My login credentials started getting flagged for routine security reviews, the kind that happen when someone upstairs wants to audit your access levels. Then my project files disappeared from the shared drive. Not deleted, just moved to a restricted folder I could no longer open. When I asked IT about it, they said they were reorganizing the directory structure for better efficiency. I filed a ticket requesting restored access. It stayed open for 11 days with the status pending management approval. That's when I did something I'd never done before. I went into the corporate charter documents, the ones filed with the state and federal regulatory bodies, and searched for my name. It appeared 47 times. Every active pharmaceutical manufacturing license listed me as the authorized signatory. Every export permit. Every DEA controlled substance registration. Every FDA facility certification. My license number, my digital signature, my biometric authentication tied to systems that had been built over 17 years. I printed every page. Then I backed them up to an encrypted drive I kept at home. Just checking, I told myself. Just verifying what belongs to whom. The boardroom smelled like victory, leather, and lies. 37 people watched as my career ended in real time, broadcast on a wall screen large enough to display quarterly earnings or public executions. Today it was the latter. The VP of operations stood at the podium wearing a smile that belonged on a funeral director who'd just sold the premium casket package. Behind him, my 17 years of biotech compliance work reduced to a single PowerPoint slide labeled Strategic Realignment Initiative. My badge still hung around my neck. Security was already moving closer. I had exactly 90 seconds before they'd escort me out like I'd stolen office supplies instead of building the regulatory infrastructure that kept this company legally alive. So I did the only thing that mattered. I opened my laptop, navigated to the federal licensing portal, and clicked one button. A single confirmation dialog appeared, Remove Authorization Signatory? I clicked yes. Then I closed the laptop, stood up, and walked toward the door while the VP talked about efficiency gains and modern compliance frameworks. Nobody noticed the system timestamp that had just logged my exit from every active regulatory chain the company owned. They were too busy applauding. My name is Evelyn Hart, and for 17 years I was the kind of invisible that corporations depend on but never celebrate. Senior Licensing Officer at Vanguard Biopharma, a title that sounded boring at cocktail parties but meant I held every federal authorization the company needed to manufacture, export, and sell pharmaceuticals across 43 states and 12 countries. I wasn't the face of the company. I was its spine. The kind of employee who arrives before executives finish their morning commute and leaves after the cleaning crew has emptied the trash. My office sat in a corner of the compliance wing, 3 floors below the executive suites, surrounded by filing cabinets containing physical copies of every certification, permit, and renewal notice that kept our labs operational. People called me paranoid for keeping paper backups. I called it pattern recognition. I'd watched 3 restructurings in my time here, watched departments gutted and reassembled like Lego sets by consultants who billed $400 an hour to recommend firing people who actually understood how things worked. But I'd survived because compliance wasn't optional. You couldn't optimize your way out of FDA regulations or streamline past DEA requirements. My work existed in a world of hard deadlines and federal consequences, where missing a renewal date meant production lines went dark and executives faced congressional hearings. So they'd left me alone. Until they didn't. Derek Vaughan arrived on a Tuesday in September with the kind of entrance that makes HR send company-wide emails about inspirational leadership. New VP of Operations, recruited from a tech startup that had recently gone public, featured in 3 business magazines as a disruptor who believed traditional corporate structures were strangling innovation. His first all-hands meeting happened in the main auditorium, standing room only, and he wore jeans with a blazer like he was about to pitch venture capitalists instead of address employees who manufactured life-saving medications. His presentation had animations. Lots of them. Buzzwords flew like confetti: synergy, agility, lean transformation, paradigm shifts. He talked about eliminating friction points and empowering dynamic decision-making frameworks. Compliance, he said with a practiced pause, creates necessary guardrails but can also create unnecessary friction. The room stayed silent. I sat in the back row taking notes. When he opened the floor for questions, I raised my hand. He pointed at me with the enthusiasm of someone who thought engagement was winning. I asked how his lean transformation model accounted for the 18-month regulatory review cycles required by federal law. He blinked, then smiled. That's exactly the kind of resistance to innovation I'm here to address. People laughed nervously. I didn't. The meeting started 3 weeks later, scheduled during lunch hours, invitation only, held in conference rooms with frosted glass that prevented anyone from seeing inside. I wasn't invited, but I noticed who was. Junior managers from operations, 2 people from finance, someone from IT whose job description included the word automation. I also noticed something else. My login credentials started getting flagged for routine security reviews, the kind that happen when someone upstairs wants to audit your access levels. Then my project files disappeared from the shared drive. Not deleted, just moved to a restricted folder I could no longer open. When I asked IT about it, they said they were reorganizing the directory structure for better efficiency. I filed a ticket requesting restored access. It stayed open for 11 days with the status pending management approval. That's when I did something I'd never done before. I went into the corporate charter documents, the ones filed with the state and federal regulatory bodies, and searched for my name. It appeared 47 times. Every active pharmaceutical manufacturing license listed me as the authorized signatory. Every export permit. Every DEA-controlled substance registration. Every FDA facility certification. My license number, my digital signature, my biometric authentication tied to systems that had been built over 17 years. I printed every page. Then I backed them up to an encrypted drive I kept at home. Just checking, I told myself. Just verifying what belongs to whom. The whispers started in the break room, the kind that stop when you walk in and restart after you leave. I heard fragments through bathroom stalls and during elevator rides. Restructuring. Realignment. Optimization. HR sent an email to the entire compliance department titled, "Exciting Changes Ahead," that used 500 words to say absolutely nothing except that we'd all be invited to individual role assessment meetings in the coming weeks. Nobody's losing their job, they said during the mandatory town hall. We're just ensuring everyone's skills are aligned with our evolving strategic vision. I looked around the room at faces I'd worked with for over a decade. Professionals who understood that pharmaceutical compliance wasn't about vision, it was about precision. But I could see them calculating, worrying, wondering if their mortgage depended on pretending this was normal. That afternoon I logged into the vendor authorization system, the portal where I approved shipments and renewed supplier certifications, and downloaded every active contract. The system logged my export as routine documentation review. Then I checked the renewal calendar, the master schedule showing which licenses expired when. 6 major certifications were due within the next 90 days. All required my signature. I added a private note to my calendar, day 0. They called it a role reassessment, but it felt like an interrogation disguised as professional development. The meeting invitation came from HR, scheduled for 9 in the morning in a conference room I'd never used. When I arrived, Derek Vaughn sat beside the HR director, both wearing expressions of practiced concern. They asked about my career journey, my proudest accomplishments, my vision for the future of compliance. Every question felt like a trap. So I answered with exact policy citations. When Derek asked how I'd modernize compliance workflows, I referenced Title 21 of the Code of Federal Regulations and explained that federal law doesn't get modernized based on operational preferences. He wrote something on his tablet. When HR asked if I'd consider transitioning into a consulting role that offered more flexibility, I asked if they meant termination with a different label. The room went quiet. Then Derek leaned forward with that startup founder intensity and said, "Evelyn, I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding about where this company is headed. We need people who can adapt." I looked at him and said, "I've adapted to 17 years of regulatory changes. How long have you been here?" 3 weeks, he admitted. I nodded. "Then I think I'll wait to see how you adapt first." The meeting ended shortly after. The mockery was subtle at first, delivered through email threads I wasn't copied on but heard about later. Someone in operations sent a meme about bureaucracy slowing down progress. Another manager joked during a team sync that they'd finally be able to move fast and break things once the old guard retired. I was 41. One of the junior analysts, a recent MBA graduate named Kent who wore sneakers to client meetings, made a comment during a presentation about how compliance needed to operate at startup speed. He glanced at me when he said it. People laughed. I didn't react. Instead, I went back to my office and opened the vendor authorization ledger, the master list of every supplier, manufacturer, and logistics partner we used. Each required quarterly recertification. Each recertification required my digital signature, verified through a biometric system tied to my federal licensing credentials. I exported the entire ledger. Then I encrypted it and saved it to 3 separate drives. The system logged my action as routine backup protocol. Nobody questioned it. They were too busy planning their agile transformation. Marcus Vale worked 2 offices down from mine, a quiet auditor who specialized in internal controls and regulatory compliance verification. He'd been at Vanguard for 12 years, the kind of colleague who noticed things but rarely spoke unless he had something important to say. One afternoon he knocked on my door holding a printout. "Can I ask you something?" he said. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. He set the paper down. It was an org chart, the new one Derek had circulated showing the proposed restructuring. My position wasn't on it. Neither was his. He pointed to a box labeled Compliance Operations Coordinator, reporting directly to Derek. "Who do you think fills that role?" he asked. I looked at the salary range listed beneath it. "Someone cheaper," I said. He nodded slowly. "You're checking something, aren't you?" I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said, "Just verifying what belongs to whom." He understood. 2 days later he forwarded me an encrypted email containing every internal memo related to the restructuring, including the ones I wasn't supposed to see. One subject line read, "Timeline for legacy role transitions." The trap closed during a Friday afternoon all-hands meeting scheduled with 20 minutes notice, the kind that makes everyone abandon their work and crowd into the auditorium wondering if someone died or got acquired. Derek stood at the podium looking solemn but energized, the expression of someone about to announce layoffs while calling it an opportunity. He talked about transformation and difficult decisions and positioning the company for future growth. Then he pulled up a slide showing organizational changes. 3 departments consolidated. 5 positions eliminated. My name appeared under strategic role realignments alongside 2 others, both people who'd been here longer than Derek had been alive. Effective immediately, he said, as part of our commitment to operational agility, we'll be transitioning several legacy roles to allow for new talent acquisition and structural optimization. Translation: you're fired so we can hire someone cheaper. HR would be reaching out individually to discuss transition arrangements, severance packages, and documentation requirements. People started looking around. I stayed still. Then Derek said something that made my jaw tighten. These changes weren't made lightly, but after careful review, we determined certain functions could be managed more efficiently through distributed accountability models. Distributed accountability. Corporate speak for nobody will actually be responsible. The meeting ended. I walked back to my office and opened my laptop. The exit paperwork arrived in my inbox within an hour, a digital packet marked urgent containing severance terms, non-disclosure agreements, and a benefits transition checklist. I read every word. The severance was calculated using a formula that undervalued my tenure and included a clause requiring my cooperation with transition activities, which meant training my replacement. There was also a non-disparagement agreement preventing me from discussing the circumstances of my departure. I forwarded the entire packet to my personal email. Then I opened the federal licensing portal, the one maintained by the FDA's Division of Drug Manufacturing Operations. My credentials loaded automatically. The dashboard showed every active license, permit, and authorization tied to my signatory status. 47 items. Each one critical. Each one legally requiring a named individual with verified credentials to maintain active status. I navigated to the Authorization Management section and pulled up the signatory designation forms. There was a button labeled Update Authorized Personnel. I clicked it. A dialog box appeared asking if I wanted to remove my designation. I hovered over the button. Not yet, I thought. But soon. I closed the laptop and went home. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and thought about 17 years of precision work, of deadlines met and disasters prevented, of being the invisible spine holding everything together while people like Derek got promoted for having good hair and knowing how to pitch investors. The public execution happened on a Monday morning during a mandatory town hall Derek had scheduled to celebrate the restructuring's successful launch. He stood at the podium wearing a fitted suit and the smile of someone who just solved a problem he didn't understand. Behind him, a slide deck titled Agile Vanguard, our next chapter displayed graphics of upward arrows and inspirational quotes about change. He talked about velocity and disruption and how sometimes difficult decisions create better outcomes. Then he started naming names. First was Bernard from Quality Assurance, a man who'd spent 23 years ensuring products didn't kill people. Derek thanked him for his service and announced his departure as a strategic alignment. Applause followed, the kind people give at funerals. Next was Teresa from Regulatory Affairs, another veteran whose institutional knowledge was about to walk out the door. More applause. Then Derek said my name. Evelyn Hart has been a dedicated member of our compliance team, and we're grateful for her contributions. However, as we evolve our operational model, we've determined that her role can be integrated into a more distributed framework that aligns with our agile transformation. People clapped. Some looked uncomfortable. I stood up, walked to the front, and placed my badge on the podium. Then I signed the exit paperwork right there, in front of everyone, using the pen Derek offered. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just left. My last official hour at Vanguard Biopharma was spent alone in my office, packing personal items into a cardboard box IT had helpfully provided. Photos of my daughter's graduation. A coffee mug that said, "I survived another audit." 17 years condensed into one box. But before I sealed it, I did one final thing. I opened my laptop and logged into the federal licensing portal one last time. The dashboard loaded, showing those 47 critical authorizations, every single one displaying my name as the authorized signatory. I navigated to the authorization management section and pulled up the signatory designation form. This time I didn't hesitate. I clicked Remove Designation. The system asked me to confirm. Are you sure you want to remove yourself as authorized signatory? This action cannot be undone and will require redesignation through formal application processes. I clicked Yes. A confirmation message appeared, Signatory removal scheduled. Authorization status will update to pending redesignation within 24 hours. Affected licenses will be flagged as inactive pending new signatory approval. I took a screenshot. Then I logged out. The system timestamp recorded my exit at 4:47 in the afternoon. I carried my box to the parking garage, loaded it into my car, and drove away. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The countdown had started. In 24 hours, every system would realize I was gone. In 48 hours, the alerts would begin. In 72 hours, everything would stop. The first sign came exactly 24 hours later, though I only heard about it through Marcus, who sent me an encrypted message late Tuesday afternoon. The compliance dashboard had turned yellow. Vendors were reporting status changes in their authorization portals. IT assumed it was a system glitch and opened tickets with the software provider. Derek scheduled a celebratory dinner with the executive team to toast the successful restructuring. Nobody connected the yellow warnings to my departure. Why would they? Compliance was boring. Bureaucratic. The kind of thing that just worked in the background like plumbing or electricity, invisible until it stops. I spent Tuesday afternoon at a coffee shop downtown, laptop open, sipping an oat milk latte and reviewing the timeline I'd documented. Every license, every renewal date, every authorization requirement mapped out with the precision I'd built my career on. My phone buzzed. Marcus again, they're calling it a vendor sync issue. I replied, it's not. Then I opened my personal email and found 3 messages from recruiters at competing firms who'd apparently heard about my sudden availability. One was from Helix Biosolutions, Vanguard's biggest competitor. The subject line read, Urgent opportunity for experienced regulatory leadership. I marked it as unread. Not yet. Wednesday morning arrived with the dashboard turning red and Derek Vaughan learning what actual problems look like. I wasn't there to see it, but Marcus kept me informed through carefully worded messages that avoided anything that might violate my non-disparagement agreement. Clinical trial shipments had been halted pending authorization verification. 3 vendors had received automated compliance alerts flagging expired credentials. Finance discovered that 2 bank accounts tied to international operations were frozen due to missing regulatory documentation. Legal received notification from the FDA requesting updated signatory information for 14 active drug manufacturing licenses. The requests were polite but firm: provide updated authorized personnel within 10 business days or face suspension of manufacturing privileges. IT finally stopped calling it a glitch when they realized the system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as designed. Every authorization tied to my federal licensing credentials had automatically reverted to pending status the moment I removed my designation. Derek called an emergency operations meeting. According to Marcus, who was invited because auditors are always invited to disasters, Derek spent 40 minutes insisting this was a technical issue that could be resolved internally. Someone from legal finally interrupted him. "It's not technical," she said. "It's regulatory. Every active license requires a named signatory with verified federal credentials. We don't have one anymore." Derek asked why not. "Because you fired her," legal replied. By Thursday, the panic had metastasized from operations into the executive suite, spreading through Slack channels and emergency meetings like a particularly aggressive virus. The FDA had escalated their inquiry, sending formal notifications to the CEO and board of directors requesting immediate compliance verification. The DEA, which oversaw our controlled substance manufacturing, sent their own letter with less polite language about potential penalties. International partners started asking questions. Helix Biosolutions, our largest competitor, had apparently called several of our key clients expressing concern about supply chain stability. Rumors were spreading. I spent Thursday morning in my apartment, still in pajamas, watching the chaos unfold through Marcus and another former colleague who'd been smart enough to recognize what was coming and had quietly started job hunting. The best message came from Kent, the MBA analyst who'd made jokes about moving fast and breaking things. His Slack message to the operations team, accidentally forwarded to me by someone who thought I deserved to see it, read, "Can someone just call Evelyn and ask her to fix this?" Followed by Derek's reply, "We'll handle this internally. I will not be held hostage by one person's technical knowledge." I laughed so hard I spilled coffee on my laptop. Technical knowledge, like 17 years of regulatory expertise, was equivalent to knowing how to reset a router. Friday brought the denial phase, the corporate equivalent of pretending the smoke alarm isn't screaming while the kitchen burns. Derek sent a company-wide email assuring everyone that minor administrative delays were being resolved through proper channels and normal operations would resume shortly. He didn't mention that proper channels meant begging federal regulators to expedite a process that normally took 3 to 6 months. He also didn't mention that 2 production lines had gone dark because the shifts couldn't legally operate without active manufacturing certifications. Or that the company's largest client had quietly reached out to Helix Biosolutions about alternative suppliers. Meanwhile, HR discovered a problem with their problem. The transition plan for my role, the one that outlined how my responsibilities would be distributed among existing staff, had been written by people who didn't understand what my responsibilities actually were. The plan mentioned license renewals but didn't explain that renewals required federal credentials earned through years of experience and examination. It referenced vendor management but ignored that vendor authorizations were legally tied to specific individuals, not departments. Someone suggested contacting me just for a signature, a quick fix to hold things over while they figured out a permanent solution. Derek refused. "We'll handle this internally," he insisted during a leadership meeting Marcus was required to attend. "We don't negotiate with former employees." Someone from legal pointed out they weren't negotiating, they were drowning. Derek maintained his position. The audit notice arrived on Monday morning, delivered via certified mail to the CEO's office and copied to the board of directors. The FDA's Office of Compliance had scheduled a comprehensive facility inspection for 2 weeks out, triggered by the ongoing signatory designation issues and multiple reports of authorization lapses. The notice was professional, almost friendly, but the implications were catastrophic. If the audit found systemic compliance failures, the FDA could suspend manufacturing operations entirely until corrective actions were verified. That meant no production, no revenue, no company. The board called an emergency meeting. I learned about it Tuesday afternoon when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. It was the CEO's assistant, a woman I'd spoken with maybe twice in 17 years. She asked very politely if I might have time for a brief conversation with leadership about some transitional questions. I asked what kind of questions. Technical ones, she said carefully. Regarding regulatory continuity. I told her I'd need specifics before agreeing to any conversation. She said she'd call back. 20 minutes later she did, this time with a number. That was their opening offer for a consultation fee. Hourly. I let the silence stretch. Then I said, I'll send over my rate sheet. I hung up and opened a document I'd prepared the week before, a professional services agreement outlining consulting terms for regulatory crisis management. The retainer was 6 figures. The hourly rate was triple what they'd paid me annually. The timeline was at my discretion. While Vanguard's legal team reviewed my consulting terms with the enthusiasm of people reading their own death certificates, I spent Wednesday morning at Helix Biosolutions headquarters, sitting across from their chief operating officer in a conference room with a view of the river. She slid a folder across the table. Inside was an offer letter. Director of Regulatory Integrity, reporting directly to the executive team, with a salary that made my previous compensation look like an insult. The role came with equity, full authority over compliance infrastructure, and a mandate to build systems that couldn't be disrupted by executive ego. She didn't say that last part, but we both knew it. We've been watching Vanguard's situation with interest, she said. And by interest she meant barely concealed glee at their competitors' self-inflicted implosion. We believe in valuing institutional knowledge rather than treating it as disposable. I asked about their current compliance structure. She walked me through their authorization chains, their renewal protocols, their relationship with federal regulators. It was solid work, professional and thorough, but it could be better. I could make it better. I accepted the offer. The press release went out Thursday morning. Helix Biosolutions appoints Evelyn Hart as Director of Regulatory Integrity, strengthening leadership in pharmaceutical compliance. My former colleagues started forwarding it within minutes. Marcus sent a message with just 3 words, "Holy hell, Evelyn." I replied, "Efficiency delivered." The vendor revolt started small, then spread like wildfire through the supply chain that kept Vanguard operational. On Thursday afternoon, 3 major raw material suppliers suspended shipments pending resolution of the authorization issues. By Friday, 2 logistics companies had invoked force majeure clauses in their contracts, legally protecting themselves from penalties while they waited for Vanguard to sort out its compliance disaster. The clauses had been negotiated years ago during a different crisis, written by someone who understood that regulatory continuity wasn't optional. That someone had been me. Each contract contained specific language requiring active, verified licensing credentials for the authorized signatory. Without that verification, the contracts entered suspended status automatically. No phone calls needed. No negotiations required. Just contractual triggers I'd embedded like insurance policies against exactly this kind of stupidity. Derek apparently spent Friday afternoon on conference calls trying to negotiate extensions and workarounds. The suppliers were sympathetic but firm. Federal regulations didn't care about operational agility or strategic transformations. They cared about authorized signatures from credentialed officers. One supplier's legal team reportedly told Derek they'd be happy to resume shipments immediately once Vanguard provided updated authorization documentation. The timeline for obtaining that documentation? 12 to 16 weeks minimum. Vanguard had maybe 4 weeks of raw materials in inventory. After that, production stopped completely. The board meeting happened Saturday morning in emergency session, which told me exactly how bad things had gotten. Boards don't meet on weekends unless the company is being sued, acquired, or actively imploding. Marcus heard about it through the internal audit grapevine and sent me a message, 7 board members present. 2 on video. CEO looks like he aged 10 years. The agenda had 1 item, compliance continuity and operational recovery. According to the leaked minutes that somehow found their way to my inbox later that day, the board asked one specific question: who approved the termination of the senior licensing officer without verifying transition continuity? The CEO pointed to Derek. Derek pointed to HR. HR pointed to the restructuring plan that Derek had authored. Legal pointed out that nobody had consulted them before firing the only person whose name appeared on every active federal authorization. The CFO ran numbers showing that each week of delayed production cost the company roughly $8 million in lost revenue, with compounding penalties for missed delivery commitments. The board asked about recovery options. Legal outlined 3 scenarios. Scenario 1, hire a new senior licensing officer and wait 12 to 16 weeks for federal credential approval. Scenario 2, negotiate a consulting arrangement with Evelyn Hart to maintain authorization continuity during transition. Scenario 3, sell the company to someone whose compliance infrastructure was still functional. They voted to pursue Scenario 2. Then someone asked if I'd already been contacted. The CEO admitted they'd reached out. Then someone asked about my response. The room went very quiet. The formal outreach came Sunday evening via email from the board chairman himself, a retired pharmaceutical executive who'd built his career during an era when institutional knowledge was valued rather than eliminated. His message was carefully worded, respectful, and utterly transparent about their situation. He acknowledged the circumstances of my departure, which he called regrettable, and outlined their proposal, a 6-month consulting engagement with full authority to restore and transition regulatory operations, compensation reflecting the urgency and complexity of the situation, and a public statement clarifying that my exit had been a strategic misalignment rather than performance-related. I read it twice. Then I replied, "Thank you for reaching out. Unfortunately, I've accepted a position elsewhere that begins immediately, and my non-compete agreement prevents me from consulting with former employers in competing markets. I wish you success in resolving your authorization challenges." I didn't mention that the non-compete was standard boilerplate with exceptions I could have negotiated. I didn't mention that my new position gave me authority to approve or deny vendor partnerships that Vanguard desperately needed. I didn't mention anything except professional courtesy wrapped around absolutely not. The chairman replied within an hour asking if we could discuss terms that might overcome the obstacles. I didn't respond. I'd already said everything that needed saying. On Monday morning, Helix Biosolutions announced a strategic partnership with 3 of Vanguard's former suppliers. The press release mentioned strengthening supply chain resilience under new regulatory leadership. My name was in the second paragraph. Derek's downfall happened quietly, without the public spectacle he'd given me. No town hall announcement, no celebration of strategic alignment, just a terse internal memo Wednesday afternoon stating he was leaving to pursue other opportunities. The board thanked him for his contributions and wished him success. What they didn't include in the memo was that Derek's new project proposal, a pitch to automate pharmaceutical compliance using artificial intelligence, had been rejected by every regulatory body he'd contacted. One of those regulatory bodies was now consulting with Helix Biosolutions on modernization initiatives. The oversight committee I'd been invited to join reviewed his proposal and found it fundamentally misunderstood how federal drug manufacturing regulations actually worked. His follow-up email to me, sent from a personal address, had the subject line, "Small World." The message was 3 sentences asking if we could set up a call to discuss regulatory technology and potential collaboration opportunities. I didn't reply. The world wasn't small. It just finally recognized who actually understood how it worked. Marcus forwarded me the internal announcement of Derek's replacement, an interim VP promoted from within, someone who'd spent 20 years in operations and understood that pharmaceutical manufacturing wasn't a tech startup. Her first company-wide message acknowledged the recent challenges and committed to rebuilding trust with regulatory partners and valuing institutional expertise. She didn't mention me by name, but everyone knew who she meant. The full collapse took 6 weeks from my exit to Derek's, a timeline I'd mapped out with the same precision I'd used for 17 years of compliance work. The leaked board minutes from late October told the complete story, clinical language describing systemic failures in regulatory continuity, unauthorized restructuring decisions, inadequate transition planning, and the departure of critical personnel without proper knowledge transfer. The minutes noted that the compliance crisis had resulted in production delays affecting 4 major drug lines, contract penalties exceeding $30 million, and the suspension of 2 clinical trials pending regulatory reauthorization. The FDA audit, which happened on schedule, found exactly what I knew they'd find. Not criminal negligence or intentional violations, just the catastrophic absence of someone who knew what they were doing. The corrective action plan required Vanguard to hire a qualified senior licensing officer, implement enhanced oversight protocols, and submit quarterly compliance reports for 2 years. The timeline for full operational restoration? Estimated at 9 to 12 months. The financial cost? Somewhere between $80 and $100 million in lost revenue, penalties, and recovery expenses. The reputational cost? Incalculable. 3 major clients had already shifted their contracts to Helix Biosolutions. 2 others were in active negotiations. The board forced out the CEO in November. His farewell statement mentioned the privilege of leading the company through challenging times and his confidence in the future. He didn't mention that the challenging times had been entirely self-inflicted or that the future he was confident about would be led by someone else. I met Marcus for coffee on a Wednesday afternoon in December, 3 months after my exit and 2 months into my new role at Helix. We sat by the window in a quiet cafe downtown, the kind of place where conversations disappear into ambient noise and nobody cares about corporate drama. He looked tired but relieved, the expression of someone who'd survived a plane crash and was still processing the experience. "They're hiring," he said. 3 new positions in compliance, 2 in regulatory affairs, 1 in internal audit. All reporting to the new VP. He paused. "She asked if I knew how to contact you." I sipped my latte. "What did you tell her?" "That you'd moved on." He smiled slightly. "She said she understood. Then she asked if I'd be interested in heading up the compliance restructuring." He was quiet for a moment. "I told her I'd think about it." I looked at him across the table, this quiet professional who'd recognized what was happening and had kept me informed when he didn't have to. "You should take it," I said. "They need people who actually understand what compliance means." He nodded. "What about you? Are you happy at Helix?" I thought about my new office, my new team, the infrastructure I was building from a position of actual authority. "Happy isn't the right word," I said. "Satisfied, maybe. Vindicated." He laughed. "You didn't plan this, did you? The revenge, I mean." I shook my head. "I didn't plan revenge, Marcus. I just let policy work." The final board memo landed in my inbox in January, forwarded by someone who thought I deserved to see how the story ended. The subject line read, "Operational Recovery Update and Compliance Restoration." The document was dense, full of corporate language about lessons learned and renewed commitment to regulatory excellence. Buried in the 3rd paragraph was a single sentence that made me pause. "Full operational restoration achieved under external consultant review with compliance sign-off provided by former personnel per regulatory requirements." They'd needed my signature after all. Not for consulting, not for training, but for one specific authorization form that could only be executed by the previous signatory during transition periods. Federal regulations were very clear about continuity requirements. I'd signed it remotely, via secure digital signature, after Helix's legal team reviewed the request and confirmed it didn't violate my employment agreement. My fee for that single signature exceeded my entire final year's salary at Vanguard. The board memo didn't mention the cost. It just noted that all regulatory systems were now operational under new leadership and permanent personnel. I printed the memo, filed it in a folder labeled Efficiency, and closed the drawer. That evening I opened my laptop and reviewed Helix's compliance dashboard, a system I'd spent 3 months rebuilding from the ground up. Everything was green. Every authorization current. Every renewal scheduled. Every signature verified. Perfect. 6 months later I sat in my office at Helix, corner view, real plants instead of plastic, surrounded by a team I'd personally hired and trained. My calendar showed back-to-back meetings with regulatory agencies, strategic planning sessions, and a keynote speech I'd been invited to give at an industry conference about institutional knowledge and operational continuity. My phone buzzed with a notification. LinkedIn had tagged me in a post. It was from Vanguard's new VP of Operations, the one who'd replaced Derek. She'd shared an article about the importance of valuing experienced professionals in regulated industries. Her comment read, "Critical lesson learned. Grateful for the professionals who build systems that last." I didn't like or comment. I just closed the app and looked out the window at the city, at the buildings full of people working in systems they didn't fully understand, maintained by professionals they didn't fully appreciate. Somewhere across town, Vanguard was still recovering, still rebuilding, still learning that efficiency means nothing if the foundation collapses. And Derek Vaughan, according to his LinkedIn profile, was now a consultant specializing in organizational transformation, offering services to companies that apparently hadn't heard his last success story. I smiled and opened my email to review the day's authorization requests. 43 items, all requiring my signature, all part of the infrastructure that kept Helix operational and compliant. They'd wanted efficiency. I'd given them exactly that. Just not the way they'd planned. Thank you for watching this story. If moments like these resonate with you, if you've ever had to choose yourself over people who couldn't see you, then you're not alone. We share stories like this every single day, real accounts of people who found their voice, set their boundaries, and walked into the life they deserved. Subscribe so you never miss the next upload, and share your own story in the comments below. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. I love you all.